welcome to Tech to Tech presented by KYZEN, where we will explore common cleaning questions and answers. Let's get started. I would like to introduce KYZEN's own Beth Bivins.
Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about replacing 3M Novec solvents for cleaning medical devices. So the future of vapor degreasing solvents is a bit fluid. 3M, of course, is exiting the business at the end of 2025, but last orders have to be replaced by March 31st of next year, which is just about a year away. They're the only U.S. manufacturer of HFEs, and probably the rest will come from China. HFCs, or hydrofluorocarbons, are being regulated all over the world, including in the U.S., where the production will have to be reduced by 40% starting next year. So some of the solvent blends that contain those will also not be available. The TSCA inventory, the TSCA is the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is a list of products that the EPA is evaluating for banning, toxicity, lowering exposure limits. And those products include trichloroethylene and propyl bromide, perchloroethylene, and methylene chloride. And then the big buzzword recently is PFAS, which the EPA is starting to regulate and require reporting, and the same with a couple of states, and probably more to come. There are already laws in place in Minnesota and Maine. So what are your options for replacing the 3M Novec fluids? I'm going to only talk about solvents today. Of course, there could be an aqueous process that's an option, but we're going to just concentrate on solvents today. So there are basically two options, two big options. One would be to put a similar non-HFE, preferably non-PFAS solvent in your existing vapor degreaser, or convert to another type of vapor degreasing process called vacuum vapor degreasing. So what are your solvent options? The global solvents of choice include blends of hydrofluoroolefins or hydrochlorofluoroolefins, which are sort of the new wave of solvents that are not considered to be PFAS. Blends of these two with trans 1,2-dichloroethylene, and then modified alcohol or hydrocarbon type solvents, which would only be able to be used in a vacuum vapor degreaser, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So these are the KYZEN solvents that we consider to be future-proof. We have basically three that go into traditional vapor degreasers, and you can see the physical properties there and the chemical structure of one of the three. And the second one, the SLV 901, is simply a blend of the 803 with trans 1,2-dichloroethylene. And they have similar physical properties to the 3M HFEs. The main difference is that they're not considered PFAS, and all of these solvents have high exposure limits compared to some of the other alternatives. So here's a list of what products replace what. So if you're using one of the 3M Novec products on the left, you could select from one of the KYZEN products on the right. I believe that the most commonly used solvent for cleaning medical devices is the 3M Novec 72DA, which is near the bottom there. And our KYZEN SLV 901 would be a drop-in replacement for that, and it's not considered a PFAS. So now we'll talk a little bit about vacuum vapor degreasing. There was a presentation by Joe McChesney a couple of weeks ago that went into quite a bit more detail about the process itself, but it is a really good process to use for cleaning medical devices because it's really good at getting into small spaces and drying. The parts will come out clean and dry. So basically, it uses a combustible, not flammable solvent, a higher boiling point solvent under a vacuum, so at below atmospheric pressure to clean. The cleaning can be done in the vapor, it can be done by flushing the solvent across the parts, it can be done by immersion with ultrasonics, or all three of those, depending on the complexity and what you're trying to clean. And or most of the cleaning fluids are formulated to clean both polar and non-polar soils. So here's a schematic of the process itself. So basically, starting on the upper left, you have 3 tanks normally of solvent, sometimes 2, but tank 1 would be the dirtiest of the solvents, and that's the solvent that would be used to initially flush the parts, which are in the work chamber in the lower left there. So the parts are cleaned either by flushing in the vapor, in ultrasonics, as I mentioned before. And then the dirty solvent goes across to a filter and back into a still. So it's distilled. And then the hot vapors condense and redistribute or fall back into tank 3, which is the cleanest solvent. So it's a lot like a traditional vapor degreaser. It's just set up a little bit differently so that the parts come out clean and dry and can be cleaned at somewhat of a higher temperature than in a regular vapor degreasing process. So some of the benefits of vacuum vapor degreasing, of course, it uses no water. So if you're concerned with water, this is a good option. Reduced floor space. The equipment generally does not take up much space, so that's a good benefit. No chemical mixing, so you don't have to do any mixing or blending of things. It's just a single solvent. No operator exposure. These systems are completely enclosed, so there's no exposure to the solvent. It's a single solvent, as I mentioned before. It uses very little energy, and there's really nothing to dispose of other than a small amount of waste that would come from the soils that you're cleaning off. And even then, sometimes you can recycle the oil if it's appropriate for what you're doing. So low solvent consumption and low total operational costs are the main 2 benefits of vacuum vapor degreasing. So here are some more chemical structures. As you can see, they're quite a bit different than the ones a few slides back. The hydrocarbon is basically just carbons and hydrogens, but it's a larger molecule. So they have higher boiling points and lower vapor pressures than the other solvents. So once you choose what you're planning to do, how do you validate that the cleaning process is good enough to replace your 3M fluids or whatever fluid you're trying to replace? Well, basically there's an ASTM standard or an ISO standard that you can follow. Either one of them will go through and step by step tell you what you should consider when you're validating your cleaning process. And that will depend on the actual part and its end use. Something that's in contact with blood, like a pacemaker or a wire for a catheter, will have to probably have more scrutiny than something a little less critical. And then the ISO 19227 is a similar one to the ASTM, but it's specific to cleaning orthopedic implants. So it's a similar test strategy, though. So you could use either of those. And some tests that might be required for the parts after you clean. Cytotoxicity is basically just a test to be sure that if there's something left behind on the part, it's not toxic to human cells. Sensitization and irritation are basically just what they say to make sure they're not sensitizing or irritating to skin or bodies. And then acute toxicity, just to be sure it won't kill you if it stays on the part. My suggestion would be to consult with a lab or a consulting firm, such as Nelson Labs or Eurofins. Those are the 2 big ones. Just to, they can help you, even if you only employ their services for a few hours, they'd be able to point you in the right direction if you're not quite sure where to start. So we do have a few, actually all of our vapor degreasing solvents have passed cytotoxicity, where we cleaned stainless steel coupons in the solvents and then sent them to a lab for the cytotoxicity testing. So both our hydrocarbon and modified alcohol and our HCFO and HCFO plus trans 1,2-dichloroethylene have all passed the cytotoxicity testing. So where do you start? I just went through a lot of different things that you could possibly try. We do have a lab in Nashville where we have both traditional vapor degreasers and vacuum vapor degreasers, and we could clean your parts in several different solvents to see what works the best, and then do some cleanliness verification using one of the methods listed here. And so in conclusion, many vapor degreasing solvents, most notably the 3M Novec products, will no longer be available or have limited availability in 18 months or less. So it's important that you start now and work with a supplier such as KYZEN, who can assist with the screening and help accelerate your qualification process. So a few frequently asked questions. Will the new replacement solvents work in my existing degreaser? If you're using a 3M Novec fluid and you decide to drop in one of our KYZEN traditional vapor degreasing products, most likely yes, but it would probably be worthwhile for us to come and take a look at the degreaser just to be sure. What is the cost of a vacuum vapor degreaser and what is the typical ROI? Well, for medical devices, most parts are pretty small. So the smaller the part, the smaller the machine needs to be and the less expensive. But there's a range of prices. But the typical ROI is short, usually less than a year, because these machines use hardly any solvent. So once you fill it up, you basically just have to top it off. The typical vacuum vapor degreaser will use maybe a drum of solvent per year, which is quite different than a traditional vacuum vapor or traditional vapor degreaser. Why is vacuum vapor degreasing a good choice for cleaning medical devices? As I mentioned, it's really good at getting into and out of parts so that they emerge clean and dry with no residue. So that's um, the main benefit for the cleaning. For just the general process itself, it's a very efficient and economical process that can last for many, many years. So how do I know which tests I need to perform to validate my new cleaning process? Well, as I mentioned a couple slides back, there was a list of a few that most likely will need to be done, but it's probably best to consult with either a consulting firm or even the FDA, because ultimately you'd have to submit everything to them to find out exactly what you need to do. And how can I know my new solvents will be available for the long term? Well, there's no guarantee for anything, but I have to say that the newer solvents that are coming out are not currently subject to any type of regulation or scrutiny. And the vacuum degreasing solvents are just well-known common solvents that'll definitely be available for the long term. The others, as far as we know, will be to the best of our knowledge. So just keep an eye on the regulations. And that's all I have. Thank you for joining and have a great day.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you all for watching this Tech to Tech session. If you would like to discuss this topic further or have any questions not answered in the session, please contact your local KYZEN regional manager or send an email to tech@kyzen.com. We'll have someone follow up with you as soon as possible. And if you like this video, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms for more expert cleaning content.